This podcast assesses and examines the idea of information literacy from two different viewpoints: the expansion and evolution of modern-day media information literacy in 1997 and the importance of information literacy and the practice of pedagogy from an information literacy librarian's perspective. The 6 frames of information literacy education are cross-examined in both papers. The introduction of media literacy as one that is challenging the traditional methods and practice of information literacy is highlighted in Hobbs' 1997 paper, Expanding the Concept of Literacy. Due to the ever-intensifying technological world around us, Hobbs clearly identifies the importance of a new media strand of literacy that is emerging due to a changing information landscape. Changes in communication technologies over the past 100 years have created a cultural environment which has extended and reshaped the role of language and the written word. Hobbs clearly refers to the news and broadcast media in her paper, stating that the new strand, media information literacy, needs to be examined so that students can learn to appreciate and understand the influx of mass media around them and be able to apply this to everyday life. It is important to remember that to be information literate does not always mean to be literate in an educational sense or setting. Hobbs reiterates the significance and necessity that media information literacy is taught in the classroom to help students further understand the complex, symbol-rich culture in which they live. Expanding the concept of literacy highlights the necessity for teachers to be aware of media literacy and the importance of the implementation of its pedagogy in an educational environment. It is clear that Hobbs identifies Egan's theory of an emerging literacy. For example, new media technology is transforming the way information is being delivered and received. Hobbs scrutinises the diverse gap between a teacher and his/her students if this is not done. Educators can either stand outside the cultural world, providing little assistance, believing that media, especially television, are the enemy, or be a part of it by making use of a full range of messages in developing children's literacy, making learning a more engaging and reflective process by integrating a new vision of literacy which reflects a complex communication environment in which citizens must manage. The importance for a student to be able to analyse the media around them, knowing why it exists and the message it is trying to deliver cannot be emphasised enough. Neither can the unjust service an educator would be doing their students if they decided to ignore this. Successful examples are provided of teachers changing their pedagogy to suit the content delivery of their subject to the students before them. By using media literacy, one teacher exclaims, I saw students turn onto literature in a way I never saw them engage with anything in the classroom. With a high-tech, changing world, we cannot afford to teach each new generation the same as the last. Even though this paper was written in 1997, many of the same issues apply to the new information literacy strands that have developed before us today. Educators need to study the current information literature landscape and map the delivery of the subject content in an up-to-date manner. Students need verification to be able to link their existing knowledge so that they may expand on this further, considering what this means to them in their environment. This in turn will help to promote lifelong learning through what theorist Bakhtin recognises as a communicative rationale. Knowledge is rationale through speech and analysis, which in turn helps to promote a better understanding. The 7 pillars of information literacy were introduced 2 years after the publication of Hobbs' paper. What's interesting to note is that Hobbs herself goes through the 7 pillars of information literacy: identify, scope, plan, gather, evaluate, manage, and present, to research, plan, and deliver her paper. However, Hobbs only ever emphasises the 4 basic processes of literacy: access, analyse, evaluate, and communicate as important focus areas for students. These 4 categories are repeated throughout the paper. Hobbs refers to students collecting, identifying, information, the importance of students being able to access skills so they can locate, gather, and organise, manage information. Communication is also highlighted as an important concept so that students can present, make use of the worldview, knowledge, attitudes, and values. Some of the pillars of information literacy are present, but not overwhelmingly so. However, people see information literacy, learning, and teaching differently, in which administrators, teaching colleagues, students, and others bring very different perspectives to the processes of information literacy education. Hobbs simply values the four basic processes of literacy and underpins the importance of an up-to-date pedagogy to be used by all in the teaching of information literacy. The content frame is addressed through the significance of students needing to know about media literacy and the magnitude of the teacher transmitting the knowledge to the student in an up-to-date manner. Hobbs looks at the new vision of literacy and the consequences of expanding media literacy. It is quite clear that all 6 frames, content, competency, learning to learn, personal relevance, social impact, and the relational frame, whilst not specifically being identified, are inextricably linked to the thesis and the general argument put forward in the paper. Whilst Hobbs makes some valid points, there are a few debatable notions. Hobbs questions why video technology has not taken off in schools and suggests that this is because television is ubiquitous, that television is merely an entertainment media. Television may be classed as a form of entertainment media, but the potential of television as an educational tool has been widely recognised. Television offers the same potential in primary and secondary education, particularly in the classroom setting. Students are much more likely to retain the knowledge gained from television programmes and videos than from lectures alone. Even though Hobbs supports the need for media literacy to be integrated into secondary education, she questions the presence and the culture of media rather than focusing back on the lack of underlying knowledge, theory and instruction that needs to be combined and instilled in the classroom. At the heart of Vygotsky's theory lies the understanding of human cognition and learning as social and cultural rather than individual phenomena. A similarity can be drawn with the book. This was once a new piece of technology, provided without instruction. A book has the same power to escort you and transport you across the globe. It once was a new form of information literacy that would have provided the same fear factor as modern-day technology. The press as a tool of political and cultural change ensured the world would never be the same again. Mass communication became possible on a scale that was unparalleled. What's more is that Hobbs refers to students as actively resisting the process of learning in school. To imply that students actively resist being educated is a profound statement to make. It is a contextual deliverance of a subject and its relationship to the student that is important. If a student does not believe what they're learning is important, they won't want to learn. Earlier Hobbs mentions, teachers often assume that the study of television, film and photographic imagery is unnecessary and redundant. If students are resisting learning, it is only due to the poor pedagogy or lack of media literacy that cannot make a subject specifically relate to them in a cultural context, resulting in turning them off and making them feel disengaged. In contrast to this, Heidi L.M. Jacobs puts forward her perspectives on information literacy and reflective pedagogical praxis from a librarian's point of view. Jacobs focuses on information literacy outside the classroom, making observations as to how a librarian can be a strong and necessary part of the effective delivery of information literacy pedagogy. She questions if librarians are getting the instructional skill they need or whether they are left feeling unprepared. James Ellenberg's work on critical information literacy, implications for instructional practice, is responded to by Jacobs, identifying the need to broaden our definition of pedagogy beyond the teaching of information literacy sessions and think critically about how we describe our pedagogical work. The need to understand the diverse range of factors that can affect pedagogy, as Bakhtin refers to as a centrifugal force, broadly expanding outwards, has to be carefully premeditated. Jacobs notes 2 problem areas, instructional skill and pedagogy. The question of an impromptu librarian due to a lack of instructional skills can leave librarians feeling unprepared for the instructional and pedagogical work that is required of them. Jacobs argues that formal training needs to become a component of the Masters of Library and Information Science, and that graduate courses must be a part of the larger endeavour aimed at helping librarians feel more confident in and prepared for their pedagogical work. In a sense, Jacobs is expressing that without one skill, the other cannot follow nor progress. Importance is placed on the library as an essential learning environment for information literacy, where students feel surrounded by the correct information resources in which to aid and guide them. The librarian can be a key factor in the learning process, as Colto refers to as a counsellor in the process of information seeking and use. However, Jacobs points out that information literacy can seem overwhelming. How can librarians tackle this problem? How can they begin towards making information literacy ideals possible? The ACRL standards are contested as to whether they are achievable. Are they the correct performance indicators that should be rigidly followed and applied, or are they turned to as a way of managing the messiness of pedagogical reflection, where information literacy becomes neatly compartmentalized into sets of competencies and measurable outcomes with boxes to check with a yes or no? This rubric's method of assessing information literacy is criticised because it is a summative process when information literacy pushes us to ask formative questions. The idea of banking education from Paulo Freire is discussed as Allenberg's understanding that literacy is a social cultural set of universal skills and abstractable processes. The relation and use of persuasive language is identified to hone a better understanding of social and cultural influences to undergraduate students. In any educational setting, a relevant and up-to-date method of delivery will help to make it specific, relevant, meaningful, and contextualized for the particular learners and their contexts. A student's lack of engagement with library sessions is highlighted, the outcome being to make the library a more universal, welcome, and up-to-date environment to motivate students to want to learn. Jacobs sees this as a daunting task for librarians. Whether making a library more holistic is in fact a daunting task, as Jacobs states, has much to be considered. The ACRL standards are a framework to help segregate information literacy. However, the framework for information literacy for higher education clearly states that neither the knowledge, practices, nor the dispositions that support each concept are intended to prescribe what local institutions should do. Each library will need to deploy these frames to best fit their own situation, including designing learning outcomes. The framework is provided to help guide and pave the way to redesign instructional sessions, assignments, and courses. Jacobs has already admitted that librarians need the correct instructional skills so they can feel prepared. This is not something that is derived from the ACRL standards, but from the institution itself. What is interesting is that the 6 frames of information literacy education framework are not mentioned in the paper. However, on analysis, Jacobs refers to the subject content of the librarian being competent enough to deliver and instruct students. The information literacy librarian should help learners to learn and seek knowledge, but this should be up-to-date and relevant. Instead of mentioning Boolean searching, Jacobs references a modern-day approach such as using Bluetooth to make their ears prick up. The social impact on society is discussed as to how to make information literacy social for our diverse student body, with the question asked, how do librarians make students engage with library sessions? Lastly, librarians are urged to review pedagogical praxis to help make learners aware of their information landscape. The 6 frames are evident, just not namely so. Attention is paid to ACRL, a professional association of academic librarians, the Chartered Institute of Library and Information Professionals, a UK leading professional body for librarians, the National Forum on Information Literacy, a collaboration of national and international organisations to help American society, as the above bodies to help to identify the definition of information literacy, making it seem not only relevant to the educational missions of academic institutions, but also possible and manageable. The United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organisation, the International Federation of Library Associations, and the Alexandria Proclamation are accused of making information literacy messier. The Alexandria Proclamation is highlighted as an important turning point that urges to consider our information literacy in contexts broader than our classrooms, libraries and campuses. Jacobs goes on to discuss praxis as the most urgent in its relation to information literacy. Theory and practice need to be unified, not cut off from each other. She makes a valid point in relation to learning being a centripetal force that should be the main focus in the classroom, suggesting that we need to shift our orientation so that we come to see and help our students see that knowledge is constructed and contested. The event that led to the establishment of the Alexandria Proclamation shows pedagogical praxis in action. A young girl being able to use her ability and apply the knowledge she had learned managed to recognise the early warning signs of an imminent tsunami and clear the beach. Both papers identify and emphasise the need for a holistic pedagogy. Information literacy is a basic human right and lies at the core of lifelong learning. Factors impacting on the development of information literacy pedagogy are stressed by both, whether that be a teacher using video as a babysitter when they are busy, or a librarian confused by the messiness of the information literacy frameworks. Even though Hobbs identifies the teacher in the classroom and Jacobs the librarian in an educational institute, Both areas acknowledge the need for more training in pedagogy and to provide help to staff who may be unfamiliar with applying pedagogical praxis. Our systems need to maintain their identity and their ability to support the self-identity of those who belong to them, but they must at the same time be capable of transforming themselves.